And to how do we strategize to and what means and how do we strategize to do such a thing. I'm honored to have with me such an illustrious panel of esteemed colleagues with me, and I'd like to introduce them to all of you. Our first panelist is Ronald Crutcher, who was born in Cincinnati and began studying the cello at 14 with Professor Elizabeth Potiche at Miami University in Ohio. As a Woodrow Wilson and Ford Foundation Fellow, he studied at Yale University, was renowned cellist Aldo Parasot, and became the first cellist to receive the Doctor of Musical Arts from Yale. The recipient of a Fulbright Fellowship, Dr. Crutcher continued his studies in Germany, and he made his Carnegie Hall debut in March of 1985. A former member of the Cincinnati Symphony Orchestra, Dr. Crutcher has performed numerous recitals in the United States, Europe, and South America, and has recorded for Austrian and German radio. For almost 40 years, he performed in the USA and Europe as a member of the Klemperer Trio. Dr. Crutcher has written extensively about the performing arts and has served internationally as a consultant for numerous music and fine arts programs. He has served on the boards of the Boston, Cleveland, and Austin Symphony Orchestras and currently is a member of the Richmond Symphony and Board of Advisors for the Sphinx organization. He is also a past president of Chamber Music America. Dr. Crutcher currently serves as the 10th president of the University of Richmond, having previously served for 10 years as president of Wheaton College in Massachusetts. A national leader in higher education, he currently sits on the boards of the Association of American Colleges and Universities and the American Council on Education. Welcome, President Crutcher. Toni-Marie Montgomery is the second recipient of the DMA in Musical Arts, Doctorate of Musical Arts degree in Piano Chamber Music and Accompanying from the University of Michigan. Go Blue! Yay! She also received the Master of Music degree from the University of Michigan. Montgomery graduated magna cum laude from the Philadelphia College of Performing Arts. Montgomery was a founding member of the Black Music Repertory Ensemble of Columbia College of Chicago. This 15-member ensemble specialized in performing works by Black composers and promoted appreciation for the Black musical heritage. Montgomery continues to give recitals and has performed throughout the United States and Austria, Brazil, Hawaii, Poland, Lithuania, and Latvia. Recent chamber music concerts include performances in Evanston, Ann Arbor, and Los Angeles with cellist Anthony Elliott, who is a former colleague here at Michigan. Montgomery is presently dean. I just promoted you to president. Is presently dean and professor of the Vining School of Music at Northwestern University. She has previously served as professor and dean of the School of Fine Arts at the University of Kansas, director of the School of Music at Arizona State University, associate dean of the College of Fine Arts of Arizona State University, and associate dean of the College of Fine Arts at the University of Connecticut. Welcome, Dean Montgomery. Our final panelist is Marvin Curtis. He recently retired from serving 12 years as Dean of Ernestine M. Racklin School of the Arts in Indiana University, South Bend. He was the first African American to serve in this role and the first African American dean in the university's 103-year history. Congratulations. It housed the areas of music, fine arts, theater, dance, communication studies, and integrated new media studies. In addition to those duties, he is the conductor of the Symphonic Choir of South Bend, a community choir that performed a 90-minute concert at the White House on December 21st, 2009. He is the first African-American composer commissioned to write a choral work for a presidential inauguration. His composition, City on the Hill, premiered with the Philander Smith Collegiate Choir of Little Rock, Arkansas, and the United States Marine Band at the 1993 inaugural ceremonies for President William Jefferson Clinton. The Chicago native earned degrees from North Park University, the Presbyterian School of Christian Education, and his doctorate from the University of the Pacific in music education. He did additional studies at Westminster College, Juilliard School, and was a Ford Foundation Fellow studying in West Africa at the University of Ghana in Legon. He has received numerous commissions from churches and colleges. He has conducted community choirs, led numerous workshops, written articles, and been guest conductor for choral festivals around the country. He served for 12 years as the National Scholarship Chair for the National Association of Negro Musicians, been recipient of numerous awards, and recently has been named to the South Bend Hall of Fame. Welcome, Dean Curtis. So I read your bios first and foremost so that everyone can hear that you're trained musicians, you're practicing musicians, even though you have risen to this level of administration and been in administration for a long period of time. But you also have all shown a commitment to African American music, which was the reason, as performers and scholars, which was the reason I wanted to convene you and be here with you. My background, just a little bit, is to say that I was the chair of the music department and directed the music program at UNC Chapel Hill. So what we also all have in common is we worked at majority institutions as the chief officer, but also I would bet in most of your positions you were also the only African American or one of one and two. So we share that. What that's like. And so one of the issues always is, how do we begin to hire faculty that reflect us? How do we recruit students that reflect diversity? And how do we change the curriculum? So I'd like to start with the first question, which is, to what extent do you think African American music and its contributions to American and world music should be present in the music curriculum of this nation's colleges and universities? President Crutcher, would you start us off?
Surely. Thank you so much, Professor Toppin. It's a pleasure to be here with you. You know, I mean, let me begin by saying I'm a bit disgusted that we're still having this conversation in 2020. In 1993, I did a presentation at the National Association of Schools of Music called Transforming the Music Curriculum. You can go back and look it up. That was 1993. So yeah, I mean, of course it should be included. I mean, because of the central role that that African American music has played in American culture, but also because, you know, I don't want. I mean, I'm 73 years old. I'm ready. I'm going to be retiring in a few years. I don't want future music students of any color, but particularly African American music students, to have the kind of experience I had when I went to Yale, when we demanded that they offer a course in African American music, all four of us who were there, including Alvin Singleton. And my eyes were opened. And I was really angry. I'm writing a memoir now, so I've just written about this recently. I was furious. You know, I'd never heard of Maud Cooney Hare or James Monroe Trotters. I didn't know those books. This is before Eileen Southern's book. So yes, absolutely. And the other thing I would add is the reason that our students, all students need to know this, is that most of our students are going to end up teaching, some in the school, a lot of them in schools. But if you're teaching in the schools, who are they going to be teaching? A lot of Black and brown kids, students, right? And they need to know this vast repertoire so they can introduce it to their students. So I'll stop ranting.
No, you're right. I mean, it's cyclical. It is difficult. I had a hard time that we were going to have this discussion as well. We've talked about this. It's time to have broader access.
Yes.
Dean Curtis?
Well, as you know, I've written several articles for ACDA on spirituals because I had a conversation with a conductor who told me that we needed to change the language of the spiritual to fit proper English when I was doing my doctoral work. I was a doctoral student, so I couldn't argue with it until later on when I became a doctor and said, wrong answer. And so my other problem is that I've taught in 3 Black colleges, and my own students did not know their own history. When I put out Let Their Voice and Sing, they said, "What is this?" And I'm like, "Excuse me." And they came out of Black backgrounds, but because of integration and other things, that had slipped by them altogether. So it's imperative, it's important, not only in music, but in all the arts. And for me, as a dean of a school of the arts, it was my job at IU South Bend to sort of push the envelope. And so we ended up doing not only music, we did Raising Under the Sun as a play on the campus. When I had enough Black students to cast it, I made sure that we talked about African American culture in all the areas. Without that, students are lacking. And my whole thing is you have to change the academy. The canon has got to change. We can no longer just study grout, which I did as a kid. We have to study everything else. And if we don't do that, we will see what we have now going on in our country, where people don't understand the culture of other people. And I'll start ranting and let Toni talk.
Thank you for saying that because, yes, absolutely. Dean Montgomery.
Of course, I agree with my colleagues. I can actually remember being a graduate student at University of Michigan, sitting in a bibliography course, and we used grout as the text. And I still talk about this, that there was the one paragraph about William Grant Still. That unnamed faculty member asked me, as the sole person of color in the room, to then talk about William Grant Still. And in just thinking about this panel and the questions that you were going to have raised, it's just, I wonder how much progress have we actually made? And I, as dean of a major music school, I'll talk later just about attempts that I've made, or at least tried to change our curriculum. I think of Dr. Crutcher, and NASM in 1993. But we have made progress. But when Dr. Curtison talked about the canon, that really is at the core. How are we going to incorporate the many contributions of African-American composers? And, a couple of years ago, a student and a group of students actually came in talking about all of these composers for whom they didn't know. They were talking about African-American, but also female composers. And it just brought me back to, my years as a student. And I was thinking to myself, why am I expecting these students to do all of the legwork that I had to do when, yes, there are tons of books and monographs that are written. There's just tons of information, but why is that not part of what we consider the canon and the core for training young musicians?
Dr. Toppin, let me just go back to something that Professor Dean Curtis said, and that is, and I'll share this experience with you. I can remember in 1969, so my point is that in a sense, we ourselves as African Americans are somewhat responsible for the absence in the curriculum. Let me just share this with you. As a Yale student, I took a group of Black students to several historically Black colleges to perform. And I remember, I'm not going to say the school, sitting down with the department chair and having a conversation with this individual. And so I said, well, what kind of courses about Black music? Oh, well, he said, no, we only teach, and he actually used these words, we only teach good music here. I was flabbergasted. This was 1969. I was flabbergasted by that. We only play good music in our home. And so anyway, my point is that I think we have come further along now, but we didn't help our own cause back in the day.
If I can say, Louise, I think part of it has to do, as I've been doing my research in education, one of the things that happened along the way was integration. And when Black teachers were removed from public schools in the 60s and 70s, 50s and 60s, and I know this for my students, literary voices and sing have been sung all the time in schools, Black schools. That was not sung anymore. I learned it because of NAM when I was a kid with Joseph P.C. Ennis. That's how I learned it. It was not taught in school. And the word Negro for me back in 1960s was the word that we had to use. It was the small that became the large N. kind of thing. And then, Black and all that kind of stuff. So we've lost, even in our churches, we've lost the idea of singing our own music and learning about our own music. And I think that's part of what we have to go back and look at. That we are, as President Crutcher said, we're responsible for some of this, and we have to teach those people that taught us to go back and say, look, this is important stuff, and not just always do what we've learned. It was due Nam that I learned about the composers that I had not heard about. So.
Thank you so much for bringing that up. And I'm going to go back to Dean Montgomery. Go ahead, please.
Thank you, Louise. Since we are celebrating Willis, I, of course, want to mention the 1985 Black Music Symposium. And today, I still talk about that symposium and just wish that we could actually recreate that. Maybe that could be one of my missions. But when I think about, because I was fortunate, my last year as a doctoral student at Michigan, I was Willis's research assistant. So he opened the doors to me to so many, not only composers, but also musicians. I can remember meeting, now I'm not even remembering his name. It'll come back to me, but just so many musicians. And then that led, of course, to my being part of the Black Music Repertory Ensemble here in Chicago. I don't want students to wait until they're in a graduate program then to have that access. Think about all of the composers who are alive today. Ron mentioned Alvin Singleton. I mean, I actually made a quick list just myself, you can't see it, but of composers whom I've met, and thinking about just the loss that our students who have no idea about these composers, when we have such a wealth of knowledge and experience. And when I think about the opportunities that we provide to, especially the performers, to then meet with living composers and how important that is in recreating the music that they've written. So, this panel is actually giving me impetus to think about a lot of things once this pandemic is over, about what we can actually do to make some changes, even past the curriculum.
Absolutely. I'm so glad that you said that. And I'm glad for what we've come up with so far, which is that it's not just a majority institution issue. It is an issue for all institutions, that we have lost a lot in terms of the place or the home that this music has. You've sort of started to answer by part of my next question, but I'm going to refine it and ask you the strategy part of it. And my question had been that since jazz and hip hop and to an extent gospel music have found sort of a home in the curriculums in the universities, is it equally important to bring African American concert repertoire? And I think we're all saying, of course, yes. And so then the question is, what strategies can schools and departments of music employ to begin those curricular conversations? And one thing Toni said just then was that whole idea of bringing us together, which is why I'm even convening us for this conference weekend. It's not only to celebrate Dean Patterson, but again, to convene thoughtful minds to begin to talk about, well, how do we move this needle beyond the conversations we've had since, like Ron said, since 1969? What are the strategies? Toni, would you start us off, please?
Sure. I'm really proud of our musicology faculty whom I challenged, and it was January of 2018, to revise the undergraduate core for the undergraduate students. So 3/4 of music history. There were many reasons why I requested this. One was just complaints from students just about the actual, not the teaching, but just where we started. It was chronological. It was the way, all of us were taught. And not only that, but also just the fact that we have a big emphasis in our school on 20th, 21st century music, and we were spending a couple weeks probably, talking about new music. But then there was also just the inclusion of different voices. And so I still am very proud of the fact that 2 of the courses, performers and performance, and then also music in the present, obviously include those different voices. But the course is the classical canon. I have to be honest, when I'm looking at the syllabus, doesn't it have that same inclusion? And as a dean, as an administrator, my colleagues understand there are carrots that we can give to faculty, but I cannot say, this is what you're going to teach in your class. And I'm not present, in their lessons, in their classes. And I would hope that, all the years that, for instance, I had Ron come, we performed Adolphus Hailstork's trio, Anthony Elliott, you mentioned, the recitals that we would give every year playing David Baker and other works, that would be an impetus to some of our faculty to then say, all right, I should be including some of this repertoire in lessons. I don't think that it's an intentional, no, I refuse to do this, but Ron had mentioned earlier, it's part of the training. And so then if we're talking about training young musicians to then become these pedagogues, then part of that is actually retraining faculty my age or older who then need to become aware of just the repertoire that is there. Every Beethoven work is not a great work. And so why is it that, I go to Chicago Symphony Orchestra, and how many times do I need to hear Beethoven's Fifth? And not only during the month of February or March, during Women's History Month, should we then be seeing this various repertoire from composers. I think I'm going to end there.
Thank you so much. I always remind people that Florence Price premiered with the Chicago Symphony. So why is Florence Price's symphony not on regular fare with every orchestra at any time, as you just said and articulated? Right. So you're saying the bringing in people is an important factor, and again, making ways to connect people together. Dr. Curtis?
Can I say one?
Oh,
just that the Chicago Music Association, African American Association of Musicians, actually contributed to paying the Chicago Symphony Orchestra for that premiere.
Correct.
So I would be remiss if I didn't mention that.
Absolutely.
Sorry.
To Dean Montgomery's point, I have two things to say. One is, those of us like myself who are deans, we cannot force the faculty, but we can heavily suggest, which I've done. But I also, like she did, and you've been one of those people, have brought in artists, because my students at IU, and even at the other schools I taught, only saw Black artists when I brought them in. They did not know that there were Black artists that existed that performed different kinds of music. And so one of the things that I've been big on is bringing in guest artists, particularly in February, we do a Black History Month concert. And that started at IU when I came 12 years ago. And it goes on every year now. And I bring in young or middle range artists. So my students get a chance not only to hear them, but they also perform during that recital hour. So kids can ask questions. And they find out that these students or these artists have gone through the same thing that they've gone through. But it's the only time that they get to see Black artists. And I'm very proud that we had George Shirley came a couple of years ago, that Willis came actually this last year when we did them all. I've had you, obviously, and others. So that's bringing in folks is important. One of the best things I think I did was we brought in William Chapman Nyaho to do a whole piano thing. And I bought for the school his CDs and his music. So it's in the library. So you can't say you can't find it. There it is. I made sure that the money that we did that. The other part of that is we as scholars have to write about this stuff. The articles I've written for ACDA were about how to perform spirituals. I did my research. I did at least 4 articles on spirituals and gospels. So people no longer say, I don't know, it's there. And so part of what we have to do as the Academy people is also put that stuff out there so people can understand that these are not cute little songs, there's history, because we don't study those in choral literature. We don't talk about that. We just do them. And so for us, it's important that we not only perform them, but that we also write about them in a way that students can find that material later on and have a point of reference, so that you get the performance end of it, but you also get the scholarly part of it. And I'm very proud of those articles because they're still being used. And it gives people a guide as to how you perform certain parts of music. And so I think the more that we write, and of course it's hard when you're a dean to write, but when we're in that almost dean state and trying to get tenure, those are the articles that we need to be writing about, that we need to push that envelope so that people see what we're doing and understand that this is important and that this is how you do certain things. This is where you find a repertoire. So it's about performing, it's about putting that repertoire into the libraries so people can find it, and also doing the writing about that as well.
Thank you. You're partially answering a question and also that's in the chat, and I'll let President Crutcher. This person wrote that isn't part of the problem that faculty teach what they know, and how can the music be disseminated in a way that makes scores and recordings of performances more accessible? And that's partially what you were saying, that as the leader, you are taking the initiative to make sure that this repertoire is in your library for people to have access to it. You're bringing people in. Both of you have said that you bring people in, so they're interacting. You're talking about scholarly writing. One of the things that I've been doing recently is publishing the scores. And I had two publications I'll sort of put up the screen tomorrow, but they actually opened for this weekend. Two scores of Adolphus Hailstork, which had never been done, are now publishable. So that is a part of what we have to do, and showing example as leaders. We're taking that initiative, saying this is important, showing its value through all of our actions if you're leading. President Crutcher.
Well, I mean, I'll just add two things with respect, and this somewhat answers the question that was in the chat, and that is, I think we have an obligation to do what we can, just as you were saying, to write about it, to introduce people, because the thing is that there's still, even in 2020, lots of myths about African Americans and classical music. And when I was the president of Chamber Music America, I wrote an article about the 1990 performance of 10 works by African American composers at the Black Arts Festival down in Atlanta, which was curated by Alvin Singleton. But the primary reason I wrote that article was because someone said, "Well, I don't know any African American chamber music," and then, well, here are 10 works there that you can, and there are many more. There are many more like that as well. So you have to, when you have that opportunity, to use the bully pulpit. But then the other thing I would say is that I believe that this racial reawakening that we're in the middle of right now has had some impact, because I don't know if you saw a few weeks ago the article about George Bridgetower. First time I've seen a real article. I first learned about George Bridgetower in that course that Carmen Moore taught at Yale University on African American music in 1970. I'd never heard of this brilliant violinist. And if you read, James Monroe Trotter's book, Music and Some Highly Musical People, or Maud Cooney Harris' book, Black Musicians and Musicians. So I give that book to art, tell people about that book. But until really we solve the first issue we talked about, where this music is embedded within the music curriculum, our successors are going to have to do those jobs. So
Absolutely.
I'll end with that.
Absolutely. Comments from the others of you? I saw you unmuted. Wondered, either of you want to say anything else?
But the other part of this too is those of us who are in the academy serve on boards of symphonies and societies. I'm now on the board of the Richmond, on the board of the South Symphony Orchestra. I'm also on the board now of the Bishop Chamber Music competition. And I'm pushing the envelope with that, because they want to do diversity. And I said, the only way you're going to do it is you have to mandate it. You can't ask kids to volunteer to do it. You have to mandate it. But here's a repertoire that you need to look at. So I'm beginning to compile scores for them to say, here are works that can be done by Black composers that you don't know about and that teachers don't know about. And unless we give them that information and force folks to do certain things to teach that music, it's not going to get taught because they're going to go back and do the same thing they've been doing. You're going to hear Haydn string quartets forever and ever and ever and ever. That's very nice, but what about the other stuff out there, the other works? And so I think part of what we have to do as leaders in the academy is to make sure that we keep up to date on material and that we push those envelopes when we're in those settings, so that when we are on those boards, that we can say to people, here it is. I tell the story of the conductor I met of the symphony who came to me and was very excited about doing a Black History Month concert. And the first thing he said was, "Oh, we can do Porgy and Bess." And I looked at him and I said, "I don't think so." But that's all he knew. And I had to explain to him, first of all, we didn't write that. That's not my story. But number two, that's not a piece that we want to do for Black History Month. Okay, let's try this instead. And I had to guide him because he did not know. And so we have to make sure that we are those advocates and we just don't say, oh yeah, we can do that. No, we're not gonna do that. And be very forceful about, as I told him once, I'm Black 12 months out of the year, not just in February or January. So let's try this again, okay?
Right. So you're bringing up that we have to be advocates.
Advocates,
Also
always. Yeah.
take those positions and opportunities when we're asked to be on board, that we have to be in place so that we can be those voices that will help steer the conversations. I saw Dr. Dean Montgomery and then
Sure. Going back into the academy, just thinking of carrots that we can use and should use, it's with faculty searches, making sure that, and I'm certainly, every faculty member will tell me, I'm very involved in our searches, not from the beginning, but making sure that I also look at the applications. Are there people of color? Are there women who are in that pool? When then the list of recommended finalists are given to me, I will then ask, well, why was this person who, I have identified as a person of color, why was this person not included? Because I think that's really the only way we can make some changes. I certainly am not a model for having a school that looks like the world does, that's for sure, as far as the faculty aspect of it. University of Michigan, among our peers at the top music schools, has always been one of, it's the that has had a larger number of faculty of color. And I'm glad that you're there, Louise. We'll continue to try to address this issue. I know about 8 years ago, I had a search with African American Studies department on campus looking for an ethnomusicologist. And it would address a dearth of training, discipline, knowledge in African American studies of music by Black composers, but also would obviously address a vacuum that was in our school. Unfortunately, that search was unsuccessful. Not that I will stop trying, but I think that these are things, if I'm being really honest, when I look at our faculty and saying, I haven't, even though my skin color, you can obviously see that I haven't been able to make a big difference as far as the faculty. Surely with numbers of students, yes, but not with the faculty. So I do believe it's a pipeline issue. There are other issues involved, but we don't have a whole day to devote to this topic. Why is there just one African American musician in the Chicago Symphony Orchestra? And then we can go down the line of other major symphony orchestras, or medium-sized orchestras. It's an issue that we unfortunately will continue to address.
And as you said, we don't have the time at today, but maybe this is, again, one of those things that we need to start having those conversations more frequently about how do we address the issues. President Crutcher, you wanted to say something.
Just one last point. I mean, the other reason why it's important for everyone to be aware of the Black tradition, African American tradition in classical or what classical music. I mean, is that they're still out there this month that we have no real tradition in this area.
Mhm.
I can remember back in the 80s, I can't remember the exact date, Edward Rothstein wrote an article about Marian Anderson. She was having a birthday. And in the New York Times, in this article, he said, well, you know, there's a reason why there's a dearth of African American musicians. They don't have much tradition, much experience with this musical tradition. I was furious. And at the College Music Society, I actually railed against that because that's just he's expressing his own ignorance. Yeah, it may not be deep, but you can't say there's no experience when you, if you know the history and know the facts.
Absolutely. And that segues a little bit, both of your comments, into the next question. There was one from the chat. How do you as administrators find balance to be advocates when you're the only one in the room? And you started to touch on that a little bit, I think, Dean Montgomery, that you are continuing to be an advocate and look at the pool, even if you're not successful. It doesn't mean that you're not doing the work to try to ensure that the school is reflective of African American and diverse bodies of people. But does anybody want to speak to that a little bit? It wasn't one of the.
Let me just add to Tony's excuse me. Like her, as a dean, I didn't have the power to make hires immediately. However, my last couple of years, I told search committees, I want to see applications because they may not recognize a Black college on an application form. They'll see a school, let's say Talladega, and they don't know what that is, so they'll ignore that. And I'll go back and say, no, go back and look at that again to make sure that those people that are on that list, who I could recognize, because I haven't taught in Black colleges, I know those names. So I want to make sure that those people were part of the search process. And so I began to do that. We were able to get some candidates. But the problem I had was I couldn't afford them because IU did not pay well. And so if you get a really good Black candidate, they're going to make money somewhere else rather than coming to where we were. So that was one of my problems. And I went to the vice president of IU and I asked him, I said, is there any money for things like this for minority hires? Of course, there wasn't. But that was one of my issues, was that how do we, because there's so few Black candidates for some of these jobs, the competition is tough. And so how do we get them, when I need them? But I made sure that I looked at their resumes when they came through so I could recognize those schools. And if they weren't candidates, I like Tony, I asked the question, why were they not selected? And many times it was because they were looking at pedigree of schools. Mm-hmm. And they didn't recognize the school, they would toss them out. Can't do that. So as the dean, I was able to make that decision different. Also working with our affirmative action office, that became a big issue. We were able to get better candidates, more African American candidates than we ever had before, because I made sure that I looked at those applications and said to the committees, what are we doing? Why can't we, what's wrong with this person? What did you not see? And that was a huge thing for us. It's a change of mentality of faculty, because faculty want to hire faculty that look like them.
Well, and that's what I was going to say, is that I think that you brought up something that's really important, which is implicit bias. And I remember mm-hmm. Chapel Hill being a part and leading a session talking about implicit bias, that without considering other parameters, you will hire exactly the same as yourself. But if you're trying to have a pool that looks different, you have to have conversations. And that means with faculty who are going to be on the search committee, mm-hmm. as well as with the leadership, so that the leadership understands what is going on, that you're looking at one pipeline only, instead of considering that people who teach at HBCUs don't teach at HBCUs just because they can't teach anywhere else. They teach at HBCUs quite often they are the leading scholar in their field, but they choose to teach at an HBCU. And you're right, luring people away from one school to the other brings up that other issue of having enough commitment in terms of salary dollars to
Right.
say, we really, this is important. And so we're going to advocate for those funds in order to bring the people that we need and want to see. President Crutcher, did you want to add anything to that?
You're
Um,
muted.
yeah,
Sorry.
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think that, you know, I thought back, I mean, it's been a long time since I was head of a music school, but I think there, even without being the head, if you have a commitment to this music, regardless of your color, there are some things you can do. And I'll just give one example. Back in 1988, I was a faculty member at the University of North Carolina School of Music, and I and a white colleague, the musicologist, had a long discussion about the fact that, you know, we were sending our students out into the music world. Most of them were going to be teachers, and yet they knew nothing about American music. And so we basically bulldozed through the faculty a course called Music History of the American Scene for music majors that dealt with African American music, shape notes, starting out with shape notes and other American Indian music. And basically, I'll just share this with you. I was not tenured at the time, and I felt so passionate about this that I just put myself on the line, and I went black at the faculty meeting. Maybe I shouldn't say that. I just went off at the faculty meeting, and it passed. I mean, it was a narrow vote, but we got it through. We got it through. But sometimes you just have to push people because,
Yes.
I mean, and so that was 1988.
But I think,
And unfortunately, you know, would you ask me, is that course still there? No, they've made some changes since then.
right. But I think of how many times, what you said going black, but think of how many times anybody wants anything pushed through a curriculum. They become very aggressive and they push it through. But nobody complains about that necessarily.
Good point. A very good point.
So it's the same here. I would like to add, but there are a couple of questions I think we can rapid fire through. And one is, do you feel it is important or imperative that the subject matter be taught by African Americans? Does anybody want to handle?
I would say absolutely not. Part of the Jessica Krug, the situation with that faculty member who obviously has mental problems that she admitted, it just makes me so sad that here's someone who was such a great researcher. Her books then received awards, but that she felt the need then to pretend, because that takes away from some of the greatness that she was able to accomplish. We're talking about the body of work of an individual, not their color. And so I would certainly hope that we would say that we're open to individuals who then are devoted to this area of research and wanting to share that information with others.
I'm glad you said that, because I had a student that finished a DMA in African American music who was a non-African American. And I thought she said it so well, I wanted to share it with you all. She said, because people kept asking her, why are you doing African American art song? And she said, I'm not trying to appropriate this music. She had gone through her undergrad with me and a master's with me and then did a doctorate. She said, I'm trying to be an advocate with others, not appropriate. And that to me is the right attitude to have and to share. Comments?
Well, hallelujah. let me, because I totally agree with what you both have said. But the other thing, I remember back many years ago, I had a big argument with someone who was a mentor for me, Paul Boylan, at an NASM meeting, because we had a meeting on, recruiting Black faculty. This was about recruiting Black faculty to the music schools. And he said, we need more Black faculty in order to to recruit Black students. And I was livid, but I calmed down and I said respectfully, I would respectfully submit that by doing that, you are allowing white faculty to abrogate their responsibility to teach those students as well. They need to be teaching all students. So, and it's not, and I like what your student said, Professor Toppin. It's not about appropriation. It's about, we need lots of folks to teach this, to teach this music. The more, the merrier.
I was going to say, I think we need both. We do need faculty of color to be a role model for students, but we also don't
Absolutely.
exclude anyone else. We don't want them to have that, you're right, that out to say that I don't need to be the one to teach it. And that brings another question that came, and you can answer both of them. How do you promote inclusivity within theory and oral skills curriculum? And I'd like to start by saying, you look at the examples that you're using, where you put Mozart, you could put Saint George. You can teach with the same skills, but you can use repertoire of African American composers if you chose to. Another way, a friend of mine teaches at East Carolina, and he teaches oral skills through world music. The whole course is non-traditional music. You could teach music history on the undergrad level using all African American composers if you wanted, for the examples you talked about, and then had homework. Teach Saint George and have your homework example in theory that you analyze a Mozart string quartet, but you've already talked about Saint George and his contribution to the string quartet in France. So there are many ways to be inclusive. Other things to add?
Let me add from my end of it. I taught high school back in the day, and I had my students bring in the music that they liked, and we would discuss that music for the whole class using melody, harmony, form, and using those musical terms to discuss their music. And I never said to a student, I don't like this, or this is bad music. I would say to all the students, this is your choice. So let's listen to it and figure out where's the melody, where's the harmony, what form is it in? Using their own music that they were listening to. It was hip hop, it was, this was back in the late 80s and 90s. But even with high school kids, you can take the music that they listen to, using musical terms to discuss types of music and the forms of music. And it becomes a different kind of discussion rather than, we're gonna talk about Bach today, we're gonna talk about Beethoven. Let's talk about what you listen to every day. And how does that become music? And what makes it this kind of music? So I think we have to look at what students are listening to, what we're listening to, and make it so that it works. So we use those terms universally, so that if the kid's listening to hip hop, we don't say, well, that's bad music. That's your choice. And here's how this works in the musical world. And here's the same form that they used back 300 years ago. It's nothing different that they're using today. And so students began to see music differently. I mean, we had kids brought in country western, they brought in all kinds of stuff. But it was my chance to use those musical terms in today's music. So I think there's all kinds of examples that we can use. And again, it goes back to the canon. We keep talking about figured bass. I just read this article about figured bass. Why are we still studying figured bass? Why are we studying something else in today's world? Why are we still studying only Western music? Why are we studying the music of Japan or Brazil or India that has a different kind of tonality, or the African rhythms? Why are we studying those things? Those things are just as important. So again, we have to change the canon that we've been using, as well as change the test that kids are given to get into school, the GRE, in music. Those things have to be looked at differently. And so it goes back to the whole idea of what are we teaching and why are we teaching it, and how do we change that canon so that if you take a graduate entrance exam, the questions are not all about 18th century counterpoint, that they're talking about other composers of different origins. And I'll stop with that.
Other thoughts? The next question I have for you is, how do you feel about the necessity of prospective faculty and the experiences they bring with African American music to the music faculty? And you've sort of, Tony, I think you particularly started touching on that, that you're looking at the whole person, but that may be a factor if that's your strategy, is to try to diversify. Am I articulating correctly?
Absolutely, yes. What other ways can this faculty member, other than teaching clarinet, how are they going to augment the colleagues who are already here? I'm not muted, am I? Yeah. So I think that that's one aspect that we do look for in hiring faculty members, especially when we're in schools where we're talking about tenure and this person is going to have a job for life. It's
Mhm.
really
Absolutely. Anyone else?
Well, I would also suggest another something else. Is that is, about a year ago, 2 years ago, actually, the dean at Yale asked me to come and do a workshop for his executive staff and his department heads as they were preparing for a strategic plan, and he wanted me to focus on diversity and inclusion. And as you may know, I mean, Yale now has an endowment, so you pay no money. So they can get the best and brightest students there, but the most talented students. And and I said to him, look, it's not likely you're going to be having an incredibly diverse student body here in the future. But the one thing that you can do with the student body, and also try to do with your faculty, is help them to understand how important it is to be open and willing to try to try to go to into diverse communities to do their concerts, to be to understand how to include in the curriculum music other than the music of white European composers. I mean, though having and that basically having those kinds of sensibilities, because in fact, if they don't do that, if in terms of their graduating students, they're not going to be really good champions for classical music in those communities. Because just as Professor Curtis was saying, if you don't find a way to reach out to folks whom you'd like to introduce to your kind of music, then they're going to be turned off by it, and then the audience, you're not going to have any audiences. So it's really having that zeal for and I mean, Yale is doing some of that with their in the community music school thing that they do. But you have to go deeper than that, because otherwise, in 100 years from now, the audiences are going to be even less than they are now.
Absolutely.
One of the things I think too for us at IU South Bend was by having the choir that I had, which was designed to sing symphonic literature mainly. I diversified that literature. We did smaller concerts. We did works with orchestra, but works of Black composers. And I introduced adults to Hale Stork's music. We actually brought Hale Stork to the campus, and when we did Dubé by Val, his huge work, and it was amazing to me that people in the orchestra had known of his work and were glad to meet him as well. So I think part of our job as deans is to advocate, but also make examples. And so, because I had a choir that was not part of my job, but it became part of my job, I was able to make that repertoire work. So we were able to do his works and other works by Black composers as part of our repertoire. And I talked about not just the music to the choir, but to the audience. And I had to explain to the choir sometimes, this is why you sing this, and this is how this is done, and give them some history as well. So it becomes more than just our students, it becomes the community at large. So when we do those concerts, it's just not do the concert and go home, but in a program, I always had the bios of the composers. I talked about those composers as we did the works, so people could hear what was going on. But not only the composers, but the performers. And I was very, very, very pleased that we had Willis come last year. We did them all at the Night Visitors, because there's the Black Key. And Willis told the story to the audience and to my students about how he got that job. It's a fascinating story that I didn't know. But here is a man in 1963 or 61 on television, a Black man singing opera. And he told that story about that. And my students' eyes, black and white, opened up widely. And we told the audience that story. And we had about 500 people in the audience. You know, they all gasped when he told them what was really going on. So bringing that to life, so people could actually see. You know, we brought Willis because we were doing them all. I wanted my students to see who this man was, and the audiences saw who he was as well. And it was a great concert. The kids did a great job, but it was the bigger part was we had Willis Patterson, who was on television talking about his experiences being a Black man in opera and what that transpired. So those are all things that I think are important, besides just the composer, but the performer as well. And I think we have to do that more and more and more and more.
I think you just brought together a little bit of something I was going to ask in the next question, which was that we, as performers, we're also educators on every step. You and Ron both were talking about this as we go into the community. It can't just be we do a performance when we're doing African American music, because you realize that you have the responsibility of educating an audience, inspiring a young person, spending some time with the next generation. One of the things that I did with George Shirley was found a competition in African American music so that it focuses. We're educating, we're focusing on this repertoire. I would just add that providing opportunity and spaces, because we're all in the academy, for workshops where people can come and spend more time. And I mean teachers from public schools, other universities, students, so they can dive more deeply into the repertoire of African American and really having that space. The question which you started to answer was the importance of undergrads in ensemble, instrumental and choral ensembles, having that performance experience in African American music. And the question was to give reasons why you feel it's to be a part of their musical armament as they enter into graduate and professional experiences. So, Dr. Montgomery, you want to take that?
I would say beyond, in addition to the choral experience, to ensure that the bands, the wind ensembles, the orchestras then do incorporate music by diverse composers. In 2013, actually, the baby orchestra, so for the freshmen and sophomores, NUCO, Northwestern University Chamber Orchestra, they then performed Florence Price's First Symphony. And we had a story in our news magazine about this, because it was not just performing it. It was first trying to get the parts, going to the Center for Black Music Research when it existed. That's another story. And then addressing all the errata that were in the scores, in the parts, and then just what a learning experience that was for those students. So I think, those freshmen and sophomores, hopefully, if they're fortunate enough to have positions in orchestras later, even community orchestras later, not professional orchestras, that they will also have opportunities then to perform works like these, and to really see what it took for a woman, in the 1930s then to have her work performed by, as you said earlier, Louise, by the Chicago Symphony Orchestra, but then that no other orchestras then were performing her work.
Absolutely. And if I could do some real rapid fire questions, because we're just about out of time, but there are some interesting questions that appeared in the chat. If maybe one person wants to talk to this, can you speak about the necessity for incentivizing URM faculty retention before they are looking for another position?
What's URM?
The person does not explain what URM is. Can you answer? Well, let's go on and I'll wait for that person to answer your question on URM. As we address the curriculum in higher education, how would you include this conversation
Oh,
with music?
Sorry.
Oh, underrepresented. Yes,
Sorry.
that's all right. None of us were thinking.
Sorry.
Could somebody want to take that really quickly? Incentivizing underrepresented faculty retention.
I think for us, it was a matter of, well, of course, it's always about money, obviously, but also opportunities. I would provide, as the dean, I had a little bit of money to help underrepresented faculty to go to conferences or to do presentations if we had any. But I would make sure that that was available. But also for my non-Black faculty, I made sure that they went to conferences about diversity to make sure that they understood what was going on, because they cannot be isolated. And so they need to be involved. So when I saw a conference or a presentation that was going on, I would make sure that I let folks know this is available. I'll send you to go and come back and report to the faculty so that everybody understood what was going on. The recruitment was not just for Black faculty, or just for me, for Black students. That the curriculum was not just for me either, it was for everybody. And so when the faculty was able to go do that and brought it back, it made it easier, I think, for folks to understand what we were trying to do. So from my office, it was an incentive thing to help that happen.
Support and incentivizing, making sure that the person doesn't feel isolated.
Right.
President Crutcher, can you put in the chat the 2 books prior to Eileen Southern?
I did that already.
Okay.
It's up a little bit way.
Thank you. Appreciate it. And then just for us to kind of mull over it, someone is trying to ask about K through 12. How would you include this conversation with music instructors K through 12? So there's a seamless instruction of music for all of the students, those who would get to perform and those who would be advocates and stakeholders getting out the vote to support our music. So that's one question. And then hesitancy, what is people's hesitation? What do you think the hesitation? Part of it, I think the hesitation is lack of knowledge.
They don't know.
Right? No, if you're not exposed, you really cannot expect people to teach repertoire or talk about this music when in fact their curriculum just still does not include it.
Toppin, someone said that everyone couldn't see the topics, the books. I don't know if there's another way I thought I put it in the chat to everyone. All panelists and attendees, is that what it should say? Did you see it? Can you see it?
I see it.
You see
I see it. Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
so it's in there.
Louise, to answer your question, I think to go back to the canon.
Some people can't see it, Ron. So they're saying resubmit it if you can. Sorry, Marvin.
That's all right. Those are 2 important books. I think when we look at what we teach, especially from K through 12, our students are going out teaching what we've taught them.
Mm-hmm.
And so if we don't teach them, if they're not taught before they go out, they're going to be familiar with it. I learned it because I was interested in it and found out about it, and then did my own research. This was before a lot of this stuff was available. But we have to change the curriculum, and we have to make the curriculum. It's not about would you change. We are going to change the curriculum. We have to demand that the curriculum be changed so that it's included, not as a sidebar. The students shouldn't have to take a class in African American music to get African American music in their music history. It should be part of. And so all those people that have PhDs in music history need to go back and learn some of this stuff. And the curriculum has to change so that and I know that's heresy, I realize that.
No, it's not.
but unless we force the change, it's not going to happen. People are not going to volunteer to learn about African American music. It has to be in the curriculum. And I push that over and over again. If it's not there, they're not going to do it. And we have to make it so that it is there. And that means a huge structure change. And I think we're going to see some of that. There's going to be resistance, obviously, because it's not what we learned in Grout. Well, I'm sorry about that. But if the book I had at Grout had one paragraph about William Grant Still, we could write a whole book about William Grant Still. Okay, so we have to make those changes and make sure that they happen across the board. And if it doesn't happen, then we have to force it to happen. And it may take years, but unless we do that, our students are not going to learn what they need to know to go out into the world. And we see it in our world now. People don't respect Black culture because they don't know it. They're afraid of it. And until they begin to respect it, people need to go to the African American Museum in Washington, D.C. and see Black culture. That worked me when I saw it. But we've got to get that in there so that, and I'll be a little political, 1619 works for me, okay? This new thing we heard about yesterday does not work for me. The 1776 thing that the president's talking about, that is crap. That's designed not to include us in the curriculum. So we need to go back and make sure that we are part of the curriculum. And I'll be quiet for a while.
I was say, well, it's time for us to end this webinar, but what it is showing, obviously, is that these conversations are not done and that there is much more that we can say. But I would like to give my other two respondents a chance to, if there's a closing statement anything you'd like to reiterate. I think we've covered a lot of territory and given some strategies of ways to work.
The one thing that I would say, because as I look at the three of us and we look towards retirement sometime soon or having retired, I want to pass on the baton to younger people. And I saw some of the chats. I could only see like a couple words, but I look forward if there are individuals who would like to reach out to me. My email is on our site, and just to talk about how I could, for instance, help or assist any of the younger people who are there. And younger, I say, you're in your 50s or younger, because we can't do this alone. And, with our war stories that we shared, talking about for me since 1985, but there has been change, and definitely, I'm not ignoring that, but more change definitely has to come. And this is the time really to grab that baton and to move forward. I think it's timely. I have to be optimistic about that.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I would just say that thank you for putting this together. I mean, it's obviously we could have gone on for hours and hours. And I too have been in the storm a long time. And anyone who is interested in talking further, or I've mentored lots of folks in my career. I feel very strongly about mentoring because I've had great mentors. You can contact me at rcrutcher@richmond.edu. Thank you so much, Professor Toppin, for
Thank
doing
you
this.
for doing that. Thank you for
Thank
inviting
you,
us.
Louise.
Oh, thank you. I'm honored to have had all four of you. And you're right that we are now the mentors, and we need to continue our work, letting the next generation take over. I would like to invite everyone to continue watching the rest of the weekend. Our next session starts at 5:30 with Willis Patterson at the Bentley. Thank you so much, my friends. I appreciate having you.
Thank you.
Bye,
Thank you.
everybody.
Bye.
Take
Bye.
care.
Take care.